my name is Mark Winston, and welcome to Contact. Our guest today is former BC Premier Michael Harcourt. Welcome to the program, Mr. Harcourt. You've written a book which is called A Measure of Defiance. Now, what inspired you to write this book? Why did you want to...
Well, I wanted to talk about the pride I felt in the accomplishments of 24 years of political life, Mark, and the fact that one person can make a difference. There's a lot of despair, a lot of cynicism now about being involved in public life, and I thought it was important to put front and center that community is important. Being involved as an active citizen is important. Being involved as an elected person is important. And I wanted to take on the prevailing majority opinion that politicians are all liars and crooks, and the demonization of politicians. I wanted to deal with the media having lost its way, which I think is very unfortunate, the lack of tolerance of interest groups, and the predominance of the neoconservative agenda. Those are the four viruses: the demonization of politicians, the media, as I affectionately call them, the scum of the earth, having lost their way, which is to report and comment instead of search and destroy. Interest groups wanting to have everything instead of most of what they set out for, and the predominance of the neoconservative agenda. So I wanted to talk about the health of our democracy, and the combination of those two things, that you can make a difference. Being involved in your community is important, number one, and number two, that we've got a sick democracy right now, is essentially what drove me to write the book.
Right. Now, you started out as a storefront lawyer, then city council, and then you were a mayor, MLA, and then, of course, premier.
Right.
Which of these positions or jobs did you enjoy the most?
Well, they were all different. I mean, being the lawyer for the Chinese-Canadian community in Chinatown, Strathcona, to stop the freeway that was going to destroy our waterfront, Gastown, Chinatown, the east side of the city, and setting up legal advice offices and advocacy for the poor with the law student legal advice clinics and the Legal Aid Society Community Lawyer Program was a great accomplishment. I thoroughly enjoyed that part of my life. And then, by surprise, being elected to the City Council in 1972, along with my good friend Darlene Missouri, as part of the Team Reform Council, and able to carry out a lot of the ideas that were important to me of a livable city, and citizens' participation, and changing the Skid Road into the downtown east side. That was great. And then, of course, becoming mayor during the transition of Vancouver into one of the great cities of the world. That was about 18 years of tremendously satisfying activity as a storefront lawyer and a civic politician. But the provincial opportunities were huge to have the NDP become a governing party rather than the eternal opposition, and to make sure that the issues we dealt with were important to mainstream British Columbians, the middle income and working people of this province, instead of fringe opinions. And we were able to do that with bringing loggers and environmentalists and Aboriginal people together to try and work out a new social contract, and a number of other big changes while I was leader of the opposition. And then as premier, to be able to declare the Tachinchini Park, to complete a agreement in principle with Anishka, to change our education system so it's relevant for the 21st century for our young people. Those are all tremendously satisfying activities. So it's hard to say, to go back to your question, it's hard to say which was the most enjoyable, because I enjoyed, all 28 years of being a hell-raising storefront lawyer, taking on Phil Gillardy and the welfare system and City Hall with Tom Campbell, right through to being premier.
Some describe you as being more to the right than maybe than you say you are yourself. How do you feel about this, Mr. Harcourt? Are you more so that way, or as far as politics?
To the right of communists, to the right of
concerned?
Yeah, I'm to the right of communists, and to the right of extreme socialists who think the state can run all the economy, that bureaucrats make good shoes and cars, and that planners know all. I mean, I've never been a strong proponent of the state owning all property and all means of production. So I have always been a mainstream, moderate social democrat. Now there are certainly people to the left of that who don't agree with that position, but that's what I've been for over a quarter of a century.
Some may say that you're more a liberal in NDP clothing.
Ooh, name names.
I don't have any particular names, but just...
No, I don't think so. My family were liberal on social credit, you know, in the 50s, if they were involved in politics at all in the 50s and 60s. My dad was too busy raising a family, and my mother being just a terrific traditional mother, and so I didn't grow up in a highly political household, a trade union household, or a CCF activist family. But no, I've always been quite consistent of believing in a mixed economy, believing in the role of private enterprise, of people taking initiative on their own behalf rather than having somebody else do it for them. But I also believe in good government. I believe in strong, effective government. I believe in making sure that the weak, the poor, the needy receive dignified services and have good lives. I believe that the marketplace, as the neoconservatives, I think so tragically are wrong, cannot deal with environmental values and social equity values. So, you know, I've been a believer in the limits to the marketplace and the role for a good, effective government, and have always put people first as a social democrat. But I've always despised communism and people who think that the state should run all businesses and own all property. I've never agreed with that. So those kind of people would think that I'm a liberal and not far enough to the left.
So you are a capitalist and a free enterpriser too, would you say?
Absolutely. Yes, I don't think there's anything wrong with people starting enterprises, employing people. The vast majority of the new jobs created in British Columbia are small businesses. Almost 90% of the new jobs are created by small businesses. As a matter of fact, 2/3 of the people that start those businesses are women, and they're very successful. So I think that's what China's finding, Russia's finding, Cuba will find, is that there is a role for initiative, for private enterprise, but not at the expense of one healthcare system for all. We have to have Medicare.
Yes.
Can't have one system for the rich where they go to the head of the queue and the rest of us take a lottery to get heart surgery. We have to have good quality public education. We have to have a safety net. We have to have pensions for people that need it. There has to be a strong government role in making sure our air is breathable, our water is drinkable. So I think there's a mainstream, moderate, social democratic value system that a huge number of people in this country hold. Now, they may not be New Democrats, and the NDP federally has a ways to go to come back, but I think that that's the predominant value of most people that are left liberals, red Tories, National Party, Green Party, New Democrats. I think there's a growing set of values that are basically social democratic values. And
some would have described you as not being a very tough premier. They said, Mike is a nice guy, but not very tough. What do you think of this, Mr. Harcourt? Are you a nice guy?
I'm a nice guy, but I can make tough decisions. If I have to fire somebody, I don't do it with relish, but I'll do it. If I have to decide whether there's going to be a $3 billion copper mine, as the forest industry alleged, or the largest park and wilderness area internationally anywhere in the world with a Tatshenshini, I can make that decision. If I think that we have to finally reach a settlement with the Aboriginal people, I'll set up a treaty commission and settle with the Nisga'a. If we have to make cuts, as I had to do in the fall of 1995 to bring the budget back into balance, I'll make those cuts. So I don't think being vicious, being the meanest SOB in the valley is leadership. I think my value as a leader in this province during this period of our history was that, yeah, I am a nice guy, and I think that's a compliment, not a term of disparagement. But I think the ability to bring people together, to make common cause, to improve our society, to solve the land use problems that have plagued this province, to bring a more cooperative labor management climate, to make sure that people in the North feel part of British Columbia rather than, as they tell me all the time, beyond hope. I think that that's a strength rather than a weakness. And so when I read media reports that the worst thing you could say about Mike Harcourt is he was a nice guy, you know, I think that's a phony view of politics. It's a macho form of testosterone-driven politics, usually by people in the media that haven't done anything with their lives except write words.
Peter C. Newman, a journalist, said that you were not corrupted by power because you never used it. Is this true?
I think that was a mean shot, uncharacteristic of Peter Newman. I know Peter as a friend and admire him greatly, but I think that was a petty little shot, frankly. And I use power continually as a creative way of changing society. And power isn't a thing. Power is simply an opportunity to make changes. And I think I succeeded in making some huge, huge changes that have been pent up for 20, 30 years in this province, to bring in a forest practices code, to bring in a land use plan for Vancouver Island, the Caribou-Chilcotin, the Kootenays. There's a whole bunch of really tough changes that we introduced when I was the Premier. And so I think being tough-minded, making tough decisions, doesn't mean you have to be mean-spirited and petty and vicious.
Throughout the book, of course, you're quite critical of the media. You talk about inaccuracies in reporting, and you say the media is more right-wing and anti-NDP. Why do you feel this way?
Well, first of all, the media is, let me just make it clear, I think the media is an absolutely essential institution for our democracy. And the role of the media is to report accurately facts, to comment fairly as critics, as columnists. What's happened, though, is that too many people in the media and the ownership of the media in this province, and Conrad Black's ownership of 60% of the English language dailies across Canada, have gone over the mark to what I call search and destroy journalism. Now, I don't know whether that started just because of the Watergate phenomenon of every reporter now wanting to be an investigative journalist and wanting to be the Robert, the Bernstein and Woodward. But it's bad, I think, and what's happened is that the media are turning into the role of making up news. And Kim Emerson did that to me, and I document that in my book, where he made up a story about me being in a conflict of interest, one of the legislative reporter for CKNW. So I think my criticism is an old-fashioned criticism of the media, that yes, it's a very important institution. I don't believe in censorship except for libel and slander. I think the media should get back to its roots of reporting accurately and fairly and commenting fairly, instead of the search and destroy journalism that we've seen all too often. How many pelts you got? Well, I knocked off this politician, whether he deserved it or not. And I think that's destructive to politicians who are now the status of a politician. And I don't know why anybody would run for the position nowadays, quite frankly. The status now is somewhere between Clifford Olson and an axe murderer, if you're a politician. So why would anybody do it? So that's self-defeating. Secondly, the media, the cynicism about the media is rampant in our society. There's a study done just a year or so ago in the United States that showed that 71% of Americans don't trust the media. So it's a downward spiral for both the two important institutions, politicians, our elected representatives, and the media. So that's why I'm critical, is because I want the media to do better, to serve our society more effectively.
Are you painting all journalists or reporters with the same brush?
No. And I make that clear in my book that, at CKNW, my quarrel isn't with Warren Barker, the legendary old news director at CKNW. It isn't with people like George Garrett and Chris Olson and people like Bill Good and Philip Till and John McComb. Those are all very good reporters and commentators. But my criticism is the new breed at NW, the Glenn McDonald's, or Gordy McDonald just took over as news director, who defended the actions of Kim Emerson in making up a story about me having a conflict of interest. with the Now Communications allegations that I gave favoritism contracts to a well-known New Democrat, Ron Johnson. Totally untrue. It wasted 7 weeks of the Premier's time in this province, tore his office upside down, looking at all the advertising, thousands of advertising contracts. The consequence for me would have been loss of office if there had been a conflict found. The consequence for Kim Emerson for making up this story was zilch. And he was found to have gone over the line in terms of professional ethics by the broadcast standards in this country. And there was no consequences for him whatsoever. So my criticism is about the predominance of that kind of behavior, the ownership of the media being neoconservative, you know, that the market rules all, government's bad, poor people are that way because they're lazy, environmental standards are there to get in the way of profits. That neoconservative predominance of the ownership of the media is bad, and the Kim Emerson type of making up stories is bad. Or the Von Palmer sting operation on Premier Clark on the so-called lie about the deficit. That was, with grave consequences for Premier Clark to be called Premier Pinocchio, because Palmer, a very skilled columnist, took a leaked document from somebody who committed an illegal act in the finance ministry of the worst case budget scenario and alleged that that was the true budget scenario. It wasn't. The media didn't question Palmer's misrepresenting of that information. And the next thing you know, you've got this mythology of Premier Pinocchio, that the Premier lied. Well, he didn't. So the media can do great damage and waste the time of the senior decision makers in this province having to defend that sort of an action or defend a phony charge of conflict of interest. And that's wrong. And I think most fair-minded British Columbians are now realizing more and more that the media have got to be more accountable for that misuse of their power.
What exactly happened then? As you were saying, it was alleged that he had lied, but you're saying that he didn't. What actually happened then, as far as the budget? Were they unable to meet the shortfall? Did they find this out later on?
What happened is that the circumstances of the economy changed. The usual budget process is back in December, January, February. The finance officials prepare various projections of the growth of forest revenues, tourism revenues, sales tax, income tax, how much is going to come in, and prepare an expenditure budget based on our goal, which is to eliminate the deficit and to get to a balanced budget and some surpluses and start paying down debt. Well, what happened is that the government had estimates ranging from a very pessimistic one through 4 others to very optimistic. The government chose the slightly optimistic growth projection of 2.7% of the growth of the BC GDP, the gross domestic product, in 1996. The Royal Bank, the Bank of Montreal, the CIBC chose similar growth rates, and so did Gordon Campbell, by the way. Gordon Campbell, for his pre-election budget, chose a 2.5% growth rate. The economy changed. Revenues were less in terms of stumpage for the forest industry and some other areas of revenue. So the economy, instead of growing 2.5 or 2.7%, was growing 1.7 to 2%. So revenues were less, so there was going to be more of a deficit. Now, these are secret cabinet documents, these projections. Somebody in the finance ministry, and it probably was the same person that leaked confidential information, budget information on Elizabeth Cull, totally illegal, who leaked a memo from Chris Trumpy, again illegal, a breach of their oath of office to maintain confidentiality and secrecy of these cabinet documents. Probably the same person leaked that document to Von Palmer. Palmer misrepresented that was the true estimate that the government covered up. Well, if the government covered it up, so did the CIBC, so did the Royal Bank, so did Gordon Campbell. It's just an honest, not even a misjudgment, it's an honest guesstimate as to what the economy is going to do in the year coming up. That proved to be wrong by the time you get from January, February. to after the election of May the 29th and into June and July, and having to revamp the budget. So that's another example, Mark, of where I think the media have done a great deal of damage for partisan purposes in Von Palmer's case, and this civil servant who has carried out one of the most serious things that a civil servant can do, which is to break their oath of office by having access to this information and leaking it to a columnist without it being obtained through the proper process, through the Freedom of Information Act, and released for everybody to see.
Municipalities are suffering a shortfall now due to the budget constraints, and they have to find some way of making up the difference, be it user fees or tax increases or cutbacks in services. And a number of people are upset over, for example, the extended hours for parking fees, which they'll have to pay more. What exactly is your stand on this, Mr. Harcourt?
The municipalities have all been cut about 3% max in their budget. The reason for that is that the federal government, starting with Brian Mulroney and carried through by the present government and Paul Martin, have cut $10 billion over the last 7-8 years out of health care, out of post-secondary education, out of social programs for the needy and the poor. And the government, when I was Premier, didn't pass those cuts down to the municipalities. But the latest round of cuts were to be shared between the cuts that the provincial government is making of their workforce and cutting back on certain areas of service, and municipal governments too, because the provincial government for 5 years kept the municipalities whole, didn't pass the cuts from the federal government on down. And Premier Clark decided that we're all going to have to tighten our belts to deal with this massive, savage, unilateral withdrawal by the federal government from Medicare, educating our young people, providing social services and a safety net for our sick and poor and our elderly. So they're going to have to find ways to, as the province has, to economize.
Just have a few minutes left, Mr. Harcourt. If you'd like to talk about what you plan to do now, or what you are doing now, and your plans for the future.
Well, I do very few interviews, so this is a unique experience for me to be back on Rogers and be talking with you. I'm mostly focused internationally, Mark. I'm working out of the University of British Columbia, the grad studies faculty, on sustainable development projects in Asia and around the Asia Pacific. I'm writing a second book on sustainable development. And as well, I'm doing some work domestically here with the trade union pension funds and the business community to build housing for the homeless throughout the province. So I'm doing lots of focused, what I think are important activities without all of the stuff I used to have to deal with before.
And how is your family? You have one son, I believe.
Yep,
his name
Justin.
Is
He's 16, 6 feet. Was 5'3" about a year and a half ago. So he's sprouted up. He'll be graduating next year from Prince of Wales High School. He's doing well. My wife Becky is teaching part-time and working with me on some of our projects. And still, she had an art gallery in Yaletown for 3 years and is still carrying on in the art business. And we're enjoying the benefits that the Canadian citizens and British Columbians enjoy as private citizens, and enjoying it immensely.
Now, if anybody is interested in a copy of your book, where can they obtain it, Mr. Harcourt? Who should they call, or where should they go to get your book?
They could get it at any of the major bookstores, or they could phone up Douglas and McIntyre, my publisher, about where the book can be found. But Duthie's would have the book, and the other major bookstores, Chapters. There's a number of bookstores that would have A Measure of Defiance, written by myself with a superb writer and journalist, Wayne Skeen, who did an excellent job of whipping my prose into shape that had suffered from 25 years of being a politician and lawyer and reading bureaucratese far too long. So he put it into a very readable, enjoyable form. And I hope people do have a chance to read it and see if they agree with me of the challenges that I put out to get involved. Being involved in your community is important. Try and make changes, leave a better world. And let's make sure that the media serves us well, and make sure we don't let the neoconservative agenda predominate our democratic debate. It's done far too much of that. So it's a defiant book. It's a frank, defiant look at politics and a life that I'm proud of the privilege of being elected 9 times in a row through 24 years of politics. And so my message is non carborundum and get involved.
Thank you for being our guest today, former Premier of BC, Michael Harcourt.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Winston, and we'd like to thank former Premier of British Columbia, Mr. Michael Harcourt, for being our guest on Contact this afternoon. We'd also like to thank Anderson's Restaurant for accommodating us as well.